Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. Today is a specialty show. I'm doing something a little bit different, similar to one or two videos that I have done in the past, but this is a little bit different. This is a new video that is still a continuation of all the movies that I bought at Opera House Video, as well as Bull Moose. It was my last. It was about a month ago, a little over a month ago now. It's hard to believe, or so. It was right around the time when we had this big storm here that hit the Mid Coast Maine area, and I had gotten some movies, and it was great. I went to a big sale in the morning at Opera House Video. I did not have power at the time, and then we ended up going to Bull Moose up in Bangor afterwards. So it was a pretty amazing day. I have gone to Bull Moose one other time since then. I bought some other movies, and I have posted videos on those movies, as well as one I still haven't gotten to, which I'm really excited about doing. So, but this is, on one hand, this is a continuation of movies that I bought during that purchase, and it was awesome. So I've been working my way through the whole box slowly, and it's been great because there's been a lot of movies I had never seen before. So it's like the first time viewing for a lot of these movies. And on the other hand, there are quite a few movies that I have seen, but they've been just a lot of fun to own them and to see them again. Probably my favorite, or one of my favorites, that I bought, and I got it on DVD. Most of the movies I did buy were DVD, but I did buy a pretty, maybe like five or six Blu-rays. But one of my favorite ones that I got, and I got on DVD, is the Clint Eastwood movie Absolute Power. I did a show on that a while back, and that is, I love that movie to death. I think it's one of the best Clint Eastwood movies ever. I think it's one of the best movies he's ever directed. I think it's one of the best movies he's ever starred in. Such a great thriller. I love that movie to death. So I was super excited to actually own it. It's a DVD copy, and but great. It's just fantastic. And then there was a whole bunch of newer, or not newer, but films I had not seen before. Where I got this horror collection of all of these old school kind of horror exploitation movies from like the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it was a horror compilation I bought that was on DVD. And about 95% of those movies I had never seen before. I finished that a while back. All of those movies, all of the reviews for all of those films. So it was a lot of films. It was 15 altogether. Those are all up on the channel, and also on Instagram and Facebook, and also on my profile page. That was a lot of fun. That was probably the coolest part of this whole journey, was discovering those movies. So I have really made some great cool connections with these movies that I never seen before, and to me that's the best part. And I had a lot of people when I was watching all of those movies, and I was watching them consecutively, back to back. I was really amazed by the amount of people that were checking out the shows, the videos, but then also the posts on the films that I was doing, and the amount of comments. It was really really cool. And a lot of those films were like super obscure. Even there was one or two that I think that were from the 50s. So to me, that's what it's about at the end of the day, and that was a really cool experience. So today's show is kind of like a revisiting or a second review of a one of I think one of easily one of the greatest movies ever made, and also it's a review of a remake of that very film, and that movie is the one and only Black Christmas. I kick myself for never getting a chance, never seeing this film. for various reasons growing up. This film came out in 1974, and it's one of those things of where I never heard of it before. When I was a kid and growing up in the 80s and 90s, and when I got into horror films, I had never heard of Black Christmas for some reason. I didn't hear about Black Christmas until probably only about 3 or 4 years ago, tops, which is so weird because Black Christmas is one of the most important and one of the greatest slasher films, slasher horror exploitation films in the world. It's I think one of the greatest, but I also feel like for the genre itself, it's one of the most important movies. It's one of the movies that I feel was one of, well, pretty much the film that I think when you look at the horror exploitation world, especially around the slasher world, which is my favorite genre, it really acted as a kind of the blueprint the for slasher films, for what that genre would become. And of course, there were films that came before Black Christmas that I think are definitely slasher films or had those elements. But Black Christmas was different because it was all of a sudden it was a really formalized movie. It introduced all the classic tropes. It really just had this brilliant structure, and it acted as, I think, as a template for what was to come. And it set the bar, I think, really, really high. It's been talked about a lot, and the movie that Black Christmas inspired the most, which is arguably commercially probably the biggest slasher film of all time, and that is John Carpenter's Halloween from '78. And Black Christmas came out in '74, so it's pretty amazing when you trace the lineage and where a lot of these amazing films came from. And like I said, there are films that came before, Black Christmas, that do have the horror elements, the slasher elements. So it's that to me is one of the most enjoyable journeys that you can go on when you're a real big fan of a particular genre, or even for that matter a place in history, particularly around or particularly related to like the cinematic or the world of film. It's so incredibly cool. And it's crazy because again, this was a movie I started hearing a lot about from watching a handful of different YouTube people that I do really like, and they were really talking a lot about this film, and I was like, why have I not seen this? So I saw this at Bull Moose. I just bought it not that long ago, and finally saw it for the first time, and I was completely blown away by it. And then the other night, I watched it again, and again, it was only my second time watching this film, and I completely am enamored with this film. This movie is a slasher masterpiece, and and to think that this movie came out in '74. So this show is about kind of looking back and talking about this movie more to a degree. But then the other focus of this film, probably the main focus, I did a review of Black Christmas quite a few months ago, and did a whole show on it, and it was a wonderful experience. The coolest part of when I did a show on Black Christmas, I was able to get Lynn Griffin, who is one of the stars of this classic movie. I was able to get Lynn Griffin on the show, and we did an interview, and that was amazing. And it's that was for me, being a film fanatic and being such a huge fan of horror and exploitation, and especially slasher. I don't know. I feel like that's one of the proudest moments I've had. What I do here and with this channel, and here at Film Fanatic headquarters. I know It's a passion project. I love doing what I do. I love talking about movies and and talking about things that are related to movies. But it's it's a small potato operation. I don't have any grandiose plan. I don't have any thing of trying to become this new YouTube sensation, or and I have lots of limitations sometimes around technology, trying to navigate through it. And I understand all of those things. It's a passion project, and it's just basically talking about things that I love. And so, but for what it is, I feel I look back at that situation, being able to have her on the show, as being one of my proudest, for what it's worth, proudest achievements for this channel. And I watched this again last night or the other night, and again, just absolutely incredible. So there's a show on, there's two different shows on Black Christmas on the channel that have been up, and also the interview, which I highly recommend to check out. Kind of the main focus of this show is about the remake. This was one of the movies I bought at Opera House during their big sale, and I had never seen this before. I heard mostly bad things about this movie. I'm really on the fence about lots of remakes. I think occasionally it's done pretty well, but I think one movie I think that's really really good, and it does something different. Well, two. I think there's two great examples I can think of that I think are shining examples of that kind of thing being successful. I think the newer, like, it's been out for a while, but the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I did not like that movie when I first saw it. I thought it was okay. And then this past year, I bought it. I got a really cheap copy of it on DVD, and it's actually really good quality DVD, a pretty high end DVD edition. And I really love that movie now. I've seen it a few times, and I just think that movie is totally awesome. And I think that's a primetime example of doing that kind of thing right. I just think it's an amazing movie. I also feel like another film that I think they really knocked it out of the park, as far as doing, like, if you want to call it a remake or a reimagining, is Evil Dead, the Evil Dead remake that came out quite a few years ago. Granted, both of these movies are pretty old when you look at the timeline, but I think they're both, like, I look at them as both being very modern and very great, just really great achievements when it comes to examples of movies that are essentially remakes or reimaginings, but they do something really, really cool and different, but yet pay homage to the original. I just think those movies are just exceptional. I think they're probably the best. And I watched, so what I did, because I had bought this during that big sale at Opera House Video, what I decided to do was watch the original from '74 and then watch the remake. And I have to say that the Black Christmas remake, and I know there's also another one that came out a few years before. In the remake of Black Christmas, this one came out in 2019. And I have to say that this movie, I think, is uh, it's probably one of the worst movies I have ever seen in my life, and it's also one of the worst, probably the worst example on how to do a remake or a reimagining of a classic film. I didn't even get all the way through this movie. It's so painful and so terrible in almost every conceivable way that one can make a movie, or that a group of people could make a movie, and especially around the idea of trying to retell or reimagine a classic film. And I'll be getting into that. But watching Black Christmas again, it the thing that I was taken aback by this film is just how incredibly atmospheric this movie is. It feels more and more when I watch this film, and I had seen lots of interviews with the cast and the filmmakers where they were talking extensively about the influence of Alfred Hitchcock on this film. And it was directed by Bob Clark, and the this edition is really really awesome. There's two discs. It's a collector's edition. There's so much in the way of special features. It's one of the best ones. And Bob Clark was talking a lot about, obviously trying to set out to make a kick-ass slasher movie, but then also, and it's part also of the amazing kind of Canadian slasher scene too that was happening in the 70s. I've covered lots of films from the 70s and 80s of all of these amazing. Uh, they kind of call them Canuck exploitation, and where there were a whole series of these amazing horror exploitation movies that were coming out of Canada, and My Bloody Valentine probably being the most popular. Amazing. But this movie is just incredible. But Bob Clark in the interview and as part of the special features was talking extensively about kind of like the Hitchcock vibe that this movie really has, and Hitchcock being such a huge influence. And the thing is, like watching this the other night, it really has that kind of vibe. Like it's like watching Vertigo or The Birds or Psycho or Dial M for Murder. I mean, it's just got that level of suspense. Yet it's like such a kick-ass slasher movie. It's so atmospheric. It's generally creepy as all hell, particularly around the phone calls. And the kills are amazing. It's a really disturbing movie, and it pushes the envelope. But the atmosphere of this film, like again, I've always said my favorite, the thing that always does it for me, if I get either makes or breaks the experience, is the atmosphere that a film can create. And this movie is all about that. So it was interesting going from this and then watching Black Christmas, which I felt was like a really. Well, the other thing about this remake is that it literally has nothing to do with the original at all, like in any way, shape, or form. There is another Black Christmas, I think, that came out in 2009, which I haven't seen, and I heard that movie is better. But so I was curious. I got this at the Opera House Video. I got it really cheap, and I want to throw this movie out and set it on fire. It's it's kind of one of those movies. I'm just amazed that this movie got made. I'm amazed that this movie actually has it feels like it has a pretty big budget behind it. It was put out by Blumhouse, which they're most well known. I mean, everything that's horror related now, they are responsible for. The last one that they just put out was the Exorcist remake, Believer, which I have not seen, but I heard it's not very good, and it has bombed significantly in the box office. They also just got hot off the heels off of the Halloween remake or reboot. There was 3 movies. Their greatest achievement, as far as I think the best movie were ever involved in, is probably Get Out by Jordan Peele. So they have some good movies under their belt, but they also have a lot of bad movies. And this is a whole nother level. This movie just is so. The thing that is such a turnoff about this movie is the heavy-handed use of politics in this movie. And it's not a case of where, if a film has, a political stance or has to a degree, like some seasonings in the film where they talk about contemporary issues that we're going through as a society, I think that's great. I think it's cool because it helps modernize, things and to make it even more uh, realistic or viable, and to kind of identify with it a little bit more. Putting it in a little bit more of a contemporary context can help. But it's a fine line. You have to, when a film becomes heavy-handed with its agenda, and it tells the viewers, tells the audience that this is how you have to think, or that has to lay it out like you're 5 years old as far as what the story is about. That's a whole nother thing. And there's a fine line with movies that obviously have a political viewpoint, or is preachy, or comes at you with an agenda where they're going to hit you over the head with a hammer. This film takes that kind of way of weaving in politics to a degree, where it literally is bludgeoning. It's like it's being hit over the head with a hammer, and it's so overt and just so disorienting, and it completely takes you out of the movie. I quite frankly, I can't think of a movie that is so wrapped up in this kind of political flag to where that becomes the centerpiece of the movie rather than trying to tell a good story. And and the movie suffers so much because, which I didn't realize till afterwards, was this movie is actually rated PG-13. This movie is so incredibly sanitized and so overtly made for a wider audience, and I just don't understand it. Like I assume that the filmmakers and Blumhouse set out to make a movie, or the way they must have conceived this movie is, well, I picture them all sitting in the boardroom, like the executives at Blumhouse, along with the filmmakers, and basically just coming to the conclusion that the people who buy movies, or the people who go to the theater, or people who are fans of film, people like me, that they're all a bunch of idiots and morons, and let's just cater to their low IQs. And and then it was greenlit. The project was greenlit, and they were given a copious amount of money, and backed by a major studio. And I just can't fathom how this movie was made. This movie has like absolutely no atmosphere. There is absolutely no suspense to this film. There's no build up. I don't care about any of the characters. Most of the characters on the screen, after about 10 or 15 minutes of them on the screen, they're just so incredibly annoying and just obnoxious and terrible and kind of disgusting that I it automatically, I get this feeling where I'm praying for their death because I hate them so much and I can't stand them. There's no characterization whatsoever. The kills are just awful, and this movie, you can tell, was edited to death. Like I guess originally this film was going to be a rated R film, and you can just tell plain as day that this film was, the balls were cut off of this film immediately, particularly around the kills. It was spayed and neutered, right out of the gate. And I'm just astounded that this movie ever got made. I don't believe that this film was very successful. I hope it wasn't. But it's honestly, and I've looked at some reviews and people talking about this film, and it was highly criticized, rightfully so, and kind of trashed. But I have to say that this is honestly one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's definitely the worst, and this came out a few years ago, but this is definitely the worst movie I've ever seen. The worst movie I've seen in recent memory. The only other film I can think of that I saw within the last couple of years or so where I was just floored and just completely, just utterly dumbfounded on what was going on in the film and kind of like coming away from the film of being like, what were they thinking? That was the last Matrix movie. I saw that in the theater and I was just like, there were times during that film I saw that in the theater where I was just like holding my head in disbelief as to what I was seeing, and I just couldn't believe that this movie actually got made and that they assume that the filmmakers assume that people are that dumb. And this, but this remake of Black Christmas is at an entirely different level. And like I said, I think that this movie is probably the perfect example of how not to make a remake or a reimagining of a classic, or just in general how not to make a film. Like I could see this being a thing like in a boardroom or something that is used as a tool by like say a film company if they're like, in this funny crazy kind of way where if you're making a project or you get the green light to get your film backed, obviously you hear stories of people, filmmakers, of where they'll make the cast or they'll do it as a group. Like recently, I saw some interviews with Martin Scorsese and also another director, Christopher Nolan. Typically, what they do when they make a film is, and of course, Christopher Nolan and Martin Scorsese are just, you know, at a whole nother level as far as their knowledge of film. But one of the typical things that they do when they assemble the cast and they're about to begin the film, and even during the process of the filmmaking, is they host movie showings where they basically watch the movie with the cast members, watch a certain group of movies with the cast members and people involved with the production of the film, of movies that they personally find as true inspirations. And I always find that super interesting. And they want to use those films as an influence on those on that particular project or projects that they're working on. I could see Black Christmas being used as a tool in regards to that, meaning that okay, I could see them pulling everybody into the same room and throwing this on and being like, okay, we're gonna watch this movie, and this will give you a sense of how we can fuck this movie up as humanly possible, and really wasting as much money as we can possibly can imagine. I could see that this film being used as that kind of a tool because it's unbelievable. I was completely flabbergasted by the film, by the story, and it just so gets into this whole like kind of modern day political stance where people are so highly offended by everything and everyone, and it really ties in the idea of gender politics. It really hammers home the point that all men are pigs and are evil, and that everybody has this sense of entitlement and that everybody is important. And this whole thing is just so laid out, but it's not. And it's not that there are, in all actuality, some of the things that they're talking about, I consider myself to be pretty, I like to think of myself as being pretty open minded or being, relatively progressive on a lot of things. And so to some degree, I kind of agree with some of the political stances that they have or that the filmmakers have in this film. But I don't want to be told what to think, and I don't want to be hit over the head, and I don't want to leave myself or get into a situation where I lead myself to a place of where I am so I become stagnant and I am so isolated because of my opinion that I am shutting everybody off or canceling everyone else because they don't agree with me and that everyone else is wrong. I want to try to live in a pluralistic, secular society where we can all have our strong opinions, but we can share them and do it in a somewhat healthy way and having healthy dialogue. This film is the epitome of or it is the anti of all of that, and it's awful. And the political stance that this film does push and the way it does it is just awful. It basically represents this movement or this idealism of where, yes, initially the idea of truth to power is, holding a mirror to a society, having the power to hold, say, people accountable for their hateful views, whether it's racist or homophobic. Also around the idea of where companies, corporations should be held accountable for their gross and heinous violations. All of those things. But that movement, to a degree, has gone so far to where they have become what they initially were against, and it's become this kind of monstrosity. And it's also evolved into this incredibly weird, highly conservative environment. I was talking about that with a friend the other day, where it feels like I feel like there are similarities between where we are now, socially and politically. I look to the '80s, during the time of Reaganomics, and when Ronald Reagan was president, and there were all, his base of folks that got him into office were comprised more or less of this population that was kind of referred to as the yippies. And basically, these were people that were kind of people in the 60s that, wanted to make a lot of money. They wanted to buy into what they felt was the American dream, and getting that idyllic house and having a wife and kids and getting that corporate job and making that money and having this facade of where things were pretty and comfortable and successful, and that this was the new American way. So these folks from the 60s and 70s evolved to this newer kind of realm, especially at that time. They moved into this new mindset of where they became the yippies, of where they became essentially yuppies. They bought into this idea of the American dream, and along with that became incredibly conservative, and also became very much a part of the system, and lost more and more of their individuality. And I feel like there is that kind of thing happening now to a degree. It's a little bit different, but I see a lot of similarities in that. And this film is kind of the epitome of that in a lot of ways. And I just and again, if it's a film that I just, regardless of politics, I don't want to be hit over the head. I don't want to be hit over the head with an agenda that, even if it's something I agree with, because right away I'm going to turn the lights off and go home. And I mean, and again, the main thing is just from a film standpoint. I don't even want to mention the filmmaker's name, but I can't recommend people to stay away from this film as humanly possible. This movie is kind of an atrocity. One of the worst movies. Definitely one of the worst movies. Even if, say, I didn't see Black Christmas or didn't know anything about it, and I just got this at face value, I'd have to say that this is easily the worst movie I've seen in recent time, and also it's just like an unparalleled atrocity. It's hard to believe that this movie has ever came out. So yeah, I don't even know what else to say. But thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. Peace.